Just before I put, oh, this meeting is being recorded. Before I get started today, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody who's been working with the Pillars Symposium to make this a really great conference. It is by far one of the better conferences I've been to, and it's probably going to be the best online conference I will ever attend in my life. So I have really enjoyed the panels I've gone to so far, and I'm really happy to be here. And thank you specifically to Carolyn Bennett-Gladia for seeing my Twitter thread and inviting me to come speak on this topic. I really appreciate that. So I am going to go ahead and, it says host has disabled participant screen sharing. Christy, could you give me power? Excellent. All right. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. I'm going to pull this chat up so I can see it. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background about who I am and kind of what our purpose is for today. So my name is Chelsea Gibson. I am currently a lecturer at Binghamton University. I teach in the history department here. And I started using Timeline.js in the classroom about 2.5 years ago. I guess it was right at 2 years ago. The pandemic has expanded my sense of time, but about 2 years ago. And what I'm basically want to do today is spend about 30 to 40 minutes kind of explaining the system and kind of giving you examples of how I've used it. And I am a history professor, but I've tried to give some examples or some thought to a lot of you who probably are not history professors, because I think this is something that can be used in a lot of different capacities. And I've specifically aimed this at those of you who may be teaching high school, but obviously if you are teaching college, then you will see what I've already done as well. So I started using this program just because I was looking for something beyond a final essay in my history courses, in part because I was tired of grading those and the students were tired of writing them, but also because I was looking for a new type of synthetic project at the end of the semester that would really have students build skills of kind of historical analysis in a new way, right? I feel like students have become so inured to the paper format that they can kind of fake it till they make it in that kind of way. Like they don't have to think as deeply about it because it's already such an ingrained system. So I've had some great success with it, and I will detail that as I go through. And I just want to say, maybe as a disclaimer, that this isn't probably going to be a full tutorial, but I am hoping to at least inspire you a little bit, because this is something I've assigned as a final project in my classes, but it can easily be used by any of you as well, as a teaching tool in your own classrooms, or maybe even as a presentation in some way. So what we're going to start off first with is exploring what Timeline.js is, so that we're all on the same page. If anybody in the chat wants to let me know if you've used this system before, I'm sure that some of you have encountered it, even if you didn't realize it, because Timeline.js is actually one of several projects from Northwestern University's Night Lab, and it's specifically created for journalists originally. So you have probably used something like the Timeline.js system when you're scrolling through The Atlantic or the New York Times or the Washington Post or something like that, because that's the original intent of this kind of program. So I'm just going to hop over to the Timeline.js website. Oh, and I also forgot, I'm going to throw this into the chat. That's the Google slide that I'm currently using. I have a lot of resources and things on this Google slide, so I just wanted to send that so that you have it for your own records. So the first thing that I am going to talk through is just the Timeline.js system itself. And I'm actually going to stop sharing for a quick second because I forgot to share my screen with sound so that we make sure that this works. All right, let's get back over here. All right, so the Timeline.js system is basically an online kind of program that uses Google Sheets as the backdrop. So the only thing that your students really have to be able to use to make this is an Excel spreadsheet. That is in some cases a high bar. I know that a lot of students are not used to using that quite yet. It really depends. Sometimes I get like business and accounting majors in my classes that are like, yes, I've been preparing for this moment. I really get how an Excel spreadsheet kind of goes. But the Excel spreadsheet is basically what's on the, excuse me, it's a Google sheet, but you know, is on the back side of this. So you do need a Google account to be able to use this program. But they have an example here on the Timeline.js system. And basically what it does is it creates an interactive timeline so that you can go from one thing to the next and put it in chronological order. So this is the example that they have on their website. And you can see it's a history of women in computing. And each time you want to go to another slide, you just click over here on the right. And you can use a lot of different types of media in this. You can use, as you can see here, Google Maps, basically anything in the Google suite links pretty well into this, but you can use images. This one's from Wikimedia Commons. You can use maps, you can use videos, you can use audio, you can just put a quote there. There's a lot of different applications here. And the ultimate goal is to just create some sort of digital sense of time, right? And I do want to note too that Timeline.js, if we go all the way down to the bottom here, is just one of several different storytelling tools that the Night Lab has created. And the Night Lab is still a place that has students. They're still always doing beta testing for different types of programs. You can see some of their most popular ones down here. So we're going to be talking about Timeline.js. This is the most popular. It's been used by, they say, by over 250,000 people at this point. It's used, and I think it's the most simple one to use. So I hope that maybe I inspire you to want to do something beyond this, but I will say they get more complicated after you leave the Google Sheet background of Timeline.js. But they have story maps, so you can use a giant map. You have to have a very large image, but you can use a very large image, and students can create, let's say they want to follow like Ben Franklin. You could follow him as he travels around basically the colonial Atlantic world, and you could, tell your story that way where it's rooted in place and time. They also have other really cool tools that I have not even tried to use. So that is food for thought there. But what I wanted to do is basically start off by letting us just watch the quick 2.5-minute video on the Timeline website and let them tell you kind of how it works. And then I will continue to explain how I've used it and some of the real pedagogical benefits that I think that it has. So I am going to hop over here to Vimeo. And please let me know if you can.
Timeline.js is a tool for making visual.
Can you hear that? It's not playing in mine. Is it playing here?
Visually rich, interactive,
yes,
and embeddable timelines. In this video, we'll show you just how easy creating a timeline is. We'll work with an example of a short history of women in computing. On the Timeline.js homepage, you'll find the timeline creator along with some tips to help you get started. It's an easy 4-step process. The first step is to create a Google spreadsheet. We provide a template you can start with by clicking Get the Spreadsheet Template. You'll need to make a copy of this template onto your own Google Drive account by clicking Use this template. Here, you can customize the timeline to your story. We'll start with the headline, Women in Computing, and move on to further slides. Each row in the spreadsheet is a separate event for your timeline. For each event, you can set a start date and an end date if your event has one. But if it doesn't, feel free to leave the end date spaces blank. You can work with several different types of media in your spreadsheet, including photos, videos, audio, tweets, and Google Maps. Find the full list of supported media types in our documentation section. You don't want to edit column headers in the first row. You also don't want to leave any blank rows in your spreadsheet. Remember that Timeline.js is a storytelling tool, so although there isn't technically a limit to how many slides you can create, we recommend not having more than 20. Now that you have your spreadsheet ready, you'll move on to step 2 and publish it to the web. You'll want to go to File and then click Publish to Web. You'll copy the URL and paste it into the space in step 3. Here you can customize further with some of the optional settings that we provide, such as changing the language, font, and even the slide your project starts on. You'll want to preview your timeline and check over your work. Click the first preview link to see your project below. If you want a specific link that you can share with people or email, click Get the Link to Preview, which should take you to a new tab and your project. Now you can still edit your spreadsheet at this point, and there's no need to republish it. When you've got it just right, you'll copy the embed code in step 4 and paste that where you want it to appear on your site. And that's it. We hope you find many uses for your timeline. Thank you for watching.
All right, great. So there is our how to use a timeline video. I will say that video was produced 5 years ago, and I think some things have been tweaked a little bit in the system, but that makes it seem very simple. And I would argue that it is relatively simple. I will say that the timeline system, like computer systems, sometimes doesn't work for reasons that are inexplicable, but it's typically pretty easy to troubleshoot. And I will say one of the really interesting features of it is that it can be in different languages. So perhaps this could have some kind of application in a language classroom, and not just in a history classroom, right? You could build this out in a lot of different and really interesting ways. So what I'm going to do is move back to my Google slide over here and talk a little bit about what I have specifically used in how I've used, the Timeline.js system, and talk a little bit about the assignment that I've given my students. So I specifically I've used actually a couple of different things in the past. The one that I think is the most effective are oral interviews. So basically there are a lot of digitized oral histories out there on library websites all across the United States and even abroad. You can find a lot of really interesting oral interviews. I actually, if this is the right link, yeah, I actually created a little handout that I've just put into the chat here that kind of shows a list of oral history interview sites and things like that. So we can talk about that a little bit later, but I specifically used oral histories. And I did this specifically because I wanted students to have to order something in chronological order, because oral histories and the way that we talk isn't nice and neat. And so when students listen to a 60-minute oral history, the person may go from their birth to their husband's death, to the beginning of their activism, to the high point of their activism, back to something in their childhood, back forward in time. And it really forces students to listen and then take the pieces of that story and place them in chronological order, which is something we historians really like to do. And so that's why I chose digitized oral interviews, because they, I think, are a really ideal medium for the classroom. So I took the advice of the Timeline.js kind of people, and I asked students to produce no more than 20 slides, no less than 13 slides, and write about 150 words per slide. Now, if you're doing this in a different type of classroom, you could easily reduce that amount. I specifically use this to replace a research paper that I would typically assign at the end of the semester. So it is relatively writing heavy, and it's also a bit research heavy, because I have students use not only an oral history, but outside sources that can help contextualize and further analyze that oral history. So there's a real research component in this as well. But students basically, I'd spend a day teaching them in class, and then we spend a little bit of time in classes after that, kind of helping them get through it. But really, after I give them this kind of initial tutorial, they start going out and they start choosing their own images, they choose their own videos, they sometimes use music or even sound clips of like interviews themselves. You can use those Google Maps. And I basically require my students to use anything that is in the public domain or under a Creative Commons license. And I think that this is actually one of the most important aspects of this assignment, because it makes students really pay attention to where they're getting their sources, where they're getting their images. Because particularly in this era of memes, students are used to just like taking something and replicating it or posting it or editing it and just moving on, particularly with things like TikTok and Instagram, where you can kind of repost things and edit them. I think that there's a real fluidity in the way that they use media at this point. And it's often eye-opening to them to have to take a step back and ask, where did this map come from? Can I use it, right? When was it created? Who created it? Who holds it? Who holds the copyright? Is there no copyright? And so that is, like I said, one of the most important elements of this project, and one that I would really encourage, if you use this kind of project, I would encourage you to keep, because this gives them a really important amount of digital literacy. Just the ability to go out and look for public domain and or Creative Commons images is really important. And like I said in my handout, we'll just go over here. The handout that I gave gives some explanation of this. So I talk about these image types. Public domain is anything published before 1923. That increases every year, obviously. Creative Commons licenses are basically just something that allows us to use images as long as they're not for commercial purposes. There are also, I think, some other kind of copyrights that allow us to use basically anything as long as for educational purposes. But I typically have students use the public domain or Creative Commons sources. And this is actually a really good way to help teach students how to navigate the internet on their own, just a little bit. I went to a great panel yesterday about encouraging students to use the open web. Like, we know that they're going to use Google, so how do we help them use it more effectively and have a keener eye, right? I really think that and I can say this because as a millennial, I still grew up before the internet was really a thing. I think a lot of the students we're now teaching are digital natives in one way, in that they've grown up with smartphones almost since they were very, very young. But on the other hand, they're not very intuitive in the way that they use a lot of this technology, because it's just been there. They didn't need to investigate it very deeply. So students actually have somewhat of a difficult time finding these images, and even just finding how you can right click and copy the image address to place it in this timeline system. You have to get like the web link with a .jpeg or a .png or something like that to post into the timeline. And that's sometimes something that they're not familiar with doing. So I think it builds some really important digital literacy. And I've given you lots of places to find images here. There's tons and tons and tons of places. You can do something as simple as using a Google image search, and you just have to go into the tool setting and just create the usage. You have to select the usage rights and basically select Creative Commons license, and it will just let you search through anything here. Yes, Sally has noted that NASA is a great place for free images. I've got that there. I was really trying to think of like, okay, you're a science teacher. Like, what are these images and sources of media that you can find? So NASA, I put NASA on there. There's a bunch of art galleries that have digitized art on there. Library of Congress has tons of stuff. And you can even go to places like Wikimedia Commons, which is a very great resource, Wikimedia Commons, and then other types of more general open use sites like Pixabay, which I have over here, and Flickr. So there are lots and lots and lots of sources. I even found this one here, Photos for Class, which is automatically school appropriate if that's something that, might worry you about students delving into the internet there. So I tried to give you a good jumping off point where you can start exploring or send your students out to explore. And then there's just so many other places out there on the internet that you can find things. So I also think that this this kind of assignment where you use oral interviews could easily be an oral interview with a scientist, right? With a mathematician, with an artist, with a government worker of some way, shape, or form. You could really use the oral interviews in a lot of ways to explore things outside of just kind of history itself. And then the reason why I use this to basically replace a final exam is because I basically want students to take this person's life that that they're choosing and show its relation to larger historical processes. So I've taught this, I've used this, like I said, with a couple of different classes. The first time I ever taught it was in a course about gender in the Cold War. And students had to pick an interview with somebody, and I gave them a bunch of different sites to use. And they had to analyze that person's life through the lens of gender, right? So if you're studying like a feminist of the second wave, how did gender influence the way that they operated in the world, right? Why did it matter that they were born in the 1940s versus the 1960s? Really helping us understand and plot this kind of historical context. And so in that way, it's a really great syncretic assignment, like a final exam. It does all the things a final exam is designed to do, which is show that they've been paying attention all semester, show that they can take that information and tweak it to use different kind of a different purpose, right? So it's not just me giving them information and them giving basically the same version of that information back to me. It's them saying, okay, I really get how, the hysteria over bad mothers in the 1950s produced X, Y, and Z, and I can see that reflected in this person's life. So I think it's a really, really effective kind of final assignment. And so I just wanted to give you guys a couple of examples from the students' projects themselves. You can find more of these on my personal website as well. But I just wanted to give you a sense of what it looks like with a student after a student's actually created it. So you can see the student has already has placed like the copyright and things here underneath the image. They've also given a little bit of a caption with this image. So the student themselves went out and found this picture. And I had them link to the interview that they used. So if somebody found this, or if we posted it somewhere, the person could be like, oh, I'm really interested in that person's life, and they could go and read the interview. So I just want to scroll through this because I think this is a really helpful example. You can see the kinds of images and media that she was using. So we've got this great video on YouTube, a 1940s guide to high school girls, and she used that to help contextualize Cold War gender ideas. And you can see she actually toggled the fonts back and forth, sorry, not the fonts, the background colors back and forth from black to white. And it's just a really great project here. Just give you a little bit of a sense. And then I also have a timeline from when I taught this in my Soviet history class. So I do want to say that like this is not something that's limited to like American history or anything having to do with the United States. There are actually a surprising amount of resources out there if you teach world history or if you want students to engage with some group beyond the United States. There's actually much to my delight, there's actually a repository of refugee interviews that Harvard conducted in the 1950s, which has its own limitations, but I was able to have students in my Soviet history class who didn't speak Russian. I was able to have them still have interviews in English that they could analyze and explore Soviet life. So you're only limited by what somebody has posted on the internet and made freely accessible. So I think it has a lot of great applications. But so this is just an example of a student, like I said, who is, instead of interpreting gender in the US, was interpreting basically the Soviet period between Lenin and Stalin. So one other thing I wanted to note is that there are lots of other applications, obviously, than just exploring an oral history, putting it into chronological order and analyzing it. I had students this past semester take one person and basically do the research into that person and tell their life story without an oral interview. They basically had to create a life story through the timeline system. I've had a colleague who used this she had a class on popular culture in the 20th century, and she had students choose an item or a person from the 20th century and then analyze its impact and look at its kind of use over time. I've also had another colleague use this. She was teaching a history of prostitution. And so she had students choose one city and tell the story of how prostitution was legislated and punished in that city and how that changed over time. So again, there's lots of different options. I could even imagine, I'm in Binghamton, New York. I could imagine an assignment in a high school classroom that says, narrate the history of Binghamton, right? The place where you live over time, or even narrate the history of your neighborhood over time, or something like that. So that, like I said, there's lots and lots and lots of different applications. So I've already mentioned some of these, but I just wanted to take 5 to 10 minutes to really talk through what the benefits I think what are the benefits of using Timeline.js. And I think that they boil down to 3 large benefits, and then I'll kind of talk about them more individually as I go through. So obviously it builds a lot of diverse skills. It's also a very student-centric assignment, and it's also that synthetic assignment. So let me enumerate some of the skills that I think this can help build for students. So one, like I've already mentioned, it teaches them how to use an Excel spreadsheet, which is useful, and it may be a skill that they do not have. So that and again, it's a Google sheet. I don't know if Google will come at me for calling it an Excel spreadsheet on accident. It's a Google sheet, but it's the same basic function. It also helps obviously build that digital literacy, as I've already mentioned. Students going out into that open web, navigating it themselves, learning how to tell the difference between an image that they can use and an image that they cannot use. And I really think anything that has a student take a moment to consider the creation of a source is just perfect as a historian, because they're just, especially with the scrolling of the internet in this era, you just it washes over you and you have no sense of where it came from, who created it. So anything that makes students stop, take a moment and really try to figure out what they're looking at, and the person that helped bring that to life is a really useful skill. On top of that, obviously, just some literacy about copyrights, I think, is also very, very, very useful. On top of that, it just builds more confidence using that open web, and it builds more confidence going outside the library resources and coming into this more open and expansive space of Google, and just helps them gain some confidence in navigating it on their own, right? And hopefully it if they're using the Library of Congress or other library resources, they're becoming aware of all these other great educational and trustworthy resources out there on the internet as well. Finally, it encourages students to think historically and builds those skills of historical analysis. I really think that students, and I have some examples of student comments that I'll show in a second, but I found that students really got the class after this assignment. And I don't know if I'm sure many of you have had this experience of where you think that you're telling something so clearly and you spend weeks on it and you're going through it and you're going through it and you're going through it. And the student just it's just not fully internalized. And I had that experience in this class, and then students did this project and then they were like, I get it. Like that deeper level of comprehension that we're always looking to achieve. Particularly because it was tied to a human being, because it was tied to one person's lived experience, students really were able able to grasp onto that and really understand what the Cold War was in this example, or how the Soviet, experience really shaped people. So I think that it really allows students to get deep into something, because they have to really think a lot about how they're going to order this, how they're going to tell the narrative of this person's life, right? I really encourage students not to just have a like, this is the first point, this is the second point, this is the third point, kind of like it's a disjointed timeline, like you might see with like little dots on it in a textbook. I really encourage them to have transitions in between these things, or to have each movement from each moment in this person's life make sense together. And so it's still building the same type of skills that an essay would, right? Where you have an introduction, you have arguments, you have sources, you have citations. I ask students to do direct citations basically on every slide, so that they're quoting and citing this material. So like I said, it is building a lot of the same skills as a traditional essay. It's just doing it in a different way that some students find really engaging. I also think that this is a really delightfully student-centric kind of project. And I say student-centric because they're allowed to choose who they study. And of course, if you don't want to give them this kind of latitude, you could assign them somebody that you feel like will be useful for them. But I had students who chose people whose life stories were a little difficult to analyze in the course of this class, but they nevertheless chose this person because it spoke to them in some way, right? Especially in this moment where we're all talking about trying to diversify the classroom, or I guess some of us are talking about how to stop that from happening. But the goal obviously is to help students see themselves in what they're learning and create some sort of personal connection to that and make it really come alive to them. Maybe that's a little romantic, but I think it's very, very useful for a student who maybe doesn't see people like them in the history classroom, be able to choose a person that they can connect with and study them as a part of their final project. So I had the only student I had who wore a hijab in my class. She found a Muslim feminist to study in this class. I had students, who were biracial, who had never gotten to study somebody biracial before. They chose somebody like that. And then you have students who would choose people that they've never encountered with, and it doesn't apply to them, or it doesn't have the same kind of direct relevance to their lived experiences, going beyond that and saying like, I want to study somebody who's in the Black Panther Party, or I want to study somebody who served in the Vietnam War because I've never gone to war, but I'm interested in learning more about that experience. So it allows students to really choose somebody that has meaning to them, that's going to encourage their enthusiasm, and they're going to get more out of the assignment as a result, I think. And then finally, as I've already mentioned a couple of times, this is a synthetic assignment. So that has its own benefits. And I think it really helps students understand why I'm teaching them something, because I give them a way to apply it at the end that combines literally everything I'll teach them over the course of the semester. How to create an argument, how to integrate quotes, how to find resources and primary and secondary sources, right? How to tell a story historically, how to look at change over time. It really allows you to kind of build those skills and then give them an application to demonstrate those skills in a way that they find really valuable. So just as a kind of final thing, I wanted to show you some of the feedback that I got from this assignment when I assigned it. So the student at top says it was unique and fun. Another student says it was fun and interactive and better than a paper. That is probably the overwhelming kind of sentiment that I get. I do want to give a caveat that this was in the pre-pandemic world, and the students in the pandemic that did this assignment were less keen on it. And I just think it was because they were like, please don't make me learn another complicated online tool. Just let me write a paper and be done with it. So you might want to gauge their level of tech burnout after this completely online semester. but prior to the pandemic, they all really liked it. Somebody here says, listening to someone's personal story gave me new insight. And this is one of my favorites. It says, if you come down here, it says, while I was originally hesitant, I quickly learned how to research and what to research. And I took pleasure in uncovering the various pieces to the puzzle, which I could then use in my timeline, which is just beautiful. That's exactly what I want them to be able to do, is to find synthesis out of a lot of disparate pieces, right? That's the ultimately that deepest level of kind of skill building and analysis that we want these students to arrive at. I gave you the tools, and then now you're able to take that puzzle and put it together. Student says they like that it was accessible. So they liked that they could send the timeline to their mom, and their mom could appreciate what they've been doing, or their friend could appreciate what they've been doing. They could use this as part of a student portfolio, right, as they go on to kind of show the kind of work that they've done. And I also wanted to give this last one that says, I prefer papers and tests to projects in history and English classes. You're always going to get some students who just don't want to have to do this kind of project because it is more complex. It does require them to learn a different type of skill, and maybe they're not going to like doing that, right? Which I find, you can respect that. So I've considered in the future maybe giving students the option of doing a traditional paper or doing this timeline system, just because, maybe it's helpful to let them choose their own track. All right. So I have some further resources here for you. That timeline how-to video. The Gilder Lehrman Institute has also created a short instruction guide. Vanderbilt has a really nice guide to using timelines as teaching tools beyond just the Timeline.js system. So if you're interested in timelines as a pedagogical tool, this is a great resource. And then I just have some of my own resources. I have that handout that I've already linked to you to help find images and oral histories. I did, if you go to the second page, list some of the oral histories that I know could be used that will be really helpful, including Science History Institute, the Studs Terkel Radio Archive, MoMA has an oral history program. And this one's really cool too. It's Ellis Island. It's like stories of immigrants who came over, which is really interesting. So I have that handout linked here. I also have linked the Google slide that I actually use in my class to teach my students. It is quite long, and I just hope that maybe, how many slides is it? It's 41 slides, but I hope that might give you a sense of like, how do I even start teaching this and approaching this in my classroom? And then again, more student examples can be found on my personal website. If you just go over to my teaching, I have some more of these timelines posted here. And if you ever have any other questions, my email is on this slide, and I am 100% happy to talk to you guys and help you work through anything like this. So with that, I am going to move over to Q&A, I think. I'm not sure if it's better to stop my screen. Let me look over here. Mary Ann Monroe says, I know that colleges don't have to comply. I don't know, is that for me? College students don't have to comply with NYSED laws. This is beyond the language that I fully understand. The students have to give PII to use this project. I do not know that. PII, personally identifiable information. They only have to have a Gmail account to be able to use Google Sheets. So it probably is as easy. So Lucy, to that question about PII, all you would have to do is maybe you could create your own Gmail account as the teacher or as somebody, and just have students create the timelines for on that, because basically all you do to start is you just say, get the spreadsheet template, and you just make a copy, right? Why is this not making a copy? And you just make a copy. And what you do from that is up to you, right? So you could make copies, and you could assign this, like, this is Jeremy's copy or something, and you could send him the link, and you could create it for these other students to be able to do it your own. Sally, can you answer Mary Ann's question?
Let me just take a quick look.
It says you would like to answer this question live.
I was just reflecting that you were answering it live. I was
I
just
understand.
moderating that. Okay.
Okay, that's fine. I was just like, Sally, can you help me out? No, it's fine. So Mary, I'm sorry, I cannot answer that question. As far as I understand, Timeline.js is an open source kind of program that basically anybody can use. Again, all you need is a Gmail account and a way to use an Excel spreadsheet like this. Sarah says, how young do you think students could be to use this resource? I really think it could be as young as you think can handle this type of, online searching, using the Excel spreadsheet. I think middle schoolers could use this. You might want to do it in a much more modified way, right? So maybe instead of 20 slides, you say, okay, you're going to make 5 slides, or even maybe you could try to have your class each find like one part of it. Let's say you have 20 students in a class, which is probably smaller than your classroom is. But let's say you have each student make a slide, and then you, the professor, could put it together. You, the teacher, could put it together and kind of help them kind of collaborate in that way. So yeah, exactly. They could work as teams, I think, is another really good option. If you wanted to do this as a group project, I think that would be really great. The only limitations, I think, of the group project aspect is just that you can, if somebody deletes something, because they all have control over the Excel spreadsheet, that might frustrate some people, but you would just have to troubleshoot it. But I really think that younger students could use this for sure. The timelines live on Night Lab's site. I don't think that you're able to, I don't think that you're able to take this and store it on your own server. Like you just have to host it from the Timeline.js site, and then you can put it into your own website. You can embed it in something, but that is something that I'm not 100% sure about. But I do think that it is live on their site. And then I've created obviously a repository of the links to what they have, but you might investigate a little bit more on the Timeline.js site. They have a lot of extra information here that can help answer maybe other questions that I don't know off the top of my head. So they've got one about privacy, other things like this. Karen says, is this something you think can be done as a mini project for high schoolers over the course of a few days? Absolutely. Our social studies teachers seem to have such full schedules, but I would love to host classes in the library where they could get experience with this. Yeah, absolutely. I think students, particularly, it depends on how much information they have up front, right? So if you have a more contained assignment and students maybe have all read a book or have all read about some person, they could come in and do this over the course of 3 to 4 hours, I would say. Because the longest kind of, I think that the thing that takes the most time is finding images. If you already have the content, the image finding probably would go a lot faster. So that's another way you could think about doing this. Leroy, it is open source technology itself. It says, will this get picked up by search engines? And it basically says no. But basically anybody can see it. So you can, it's just open. It's just out there on the internet for basically anybody to access. You don't have to log in. You just basically take the link that you can generate after, sorry, I'm having a hard time clicking here. You just take the link that you generate here. It will basically generate something here. And, I just have students turn in this link to me. And so we haven't made anything here, but I just have them turn in this link to me. It obviously gives you an embed so that you're able to embed it into a site as well. Martha, it is a Google Sheet. It's not an Excel spreadsheet. I'm sorry, I'm using those interchangeably and I shouldn't, but they're just linked in my mind. It's a Google spreadsheet. That's what it is a Google spreadsheet. Any other questions? I didn't know if we go to 1150 or if we go to 12.
We're set up to go to 12, but I think it can just go to a natural conclusion whenever we feel we've We
'Cause
talked it out.
I had thought like if we wanted to see it real time, I could go through and I could show you how, how quickly you can kind of put one together, if that would be helpful to anybody. I don't know if any.
I think it would be fun to see that.
Okay, so let's go over here. So this is the copy of my Google Sheet, right? The copy of my Google Sheet. So I'll just add this to my drive. So this is basically what you're going to be working with on the back end, right? Working on the back end. So one thing that I thought could be interesting is if we just put a couple of things in here. So I already have the Library of Congress pulled up just to give you a sense of how you would do this. So let's say that you have, a project that you want to do telling the history of, I have no idea, librarians, somebody in the Library of Congress, I'm not sure. You can go to the Library of Congress website, and you always want to click larger image available anywhere, because otherwise you're not going to be able to link to this image. But basically, we could go through and pick anything here, right? But let's say we want to tell the story of Carla Diane Hayden, who was the first woman and the first African-American to hold the post of Librarian of Congress. So I can go over here to view larger, unless it's not going to work for me. Let's try this one. They're not loading. All right, so sometimes the Library of Congress website doesn't work as well as you would like it to work. Maybe I just have to be patient. But what you would basically do is you would go to view larger, and you would have to copy the link to this image. So because this isn't working, I'm going to go to Wikimedia Commons. And let's type in librarian again. All right, great. Clarabelle Barnett, excellent. She was the head librarian of the USDA library. Look at her, progressive era lady. All right, so basically what we would do here is you would have students look at this image and try to find some information about it. So it was created by somebody, we don't know who, it was a staff photo, and we know it's in the public domain, right? So basically what your students can do is you can copy the image address, and it's always useful to double check that, and you can just copy it back into this. So this is quite a large image, but so basically what I've done is I've copied the image address that I can now use in my timeline. If I can let this pop back up. If I go over here to my Excel spreadsheet. So let's say I want to tell the story of this woman whose name I've already forgotten, Clarabelle Barnett. So let's say I want to tell the story of Clarabelle Barnett. Clarabelle Barnett was the USDA librarian from, what was it, like 1906 to 1940. I just put my media in here. I just copy and paste my media here. So now we've got her image here rather than the thing that they had already put in. Just go ahead and delete this. Media credit, it's in the public domain. Wikimedia Commons. So I've just given a headline to my slide. I've given some information about whatever I want to tell there. I've put some media in there. I've said that it's in the public domain. If I could spell public domain, that'd be better. And it's in Wikimedia Commons. So basically what you do next is you figure out where you want this to be placed on the timeline. So this was probably taken around the time that she became a librarian. Who knows? Maybe it was taken in the middle of her tenure. It says it was in 1930. There we go. So let's just say this is in 1930, and that's where I want to place it on the timeline. These columns here, place it at the beginning of the timeline, like it's the beginning point on the timeline. These columns here are the end point. So if I wanted to show that she was a librarian from a period of time, I could put like 1906 to 1940, and it would show up in the timeline as kind of a long gray image there to show this kind of passage of time. But I just want to do one date. So all I have to do here is do year And I don't have to put an end date, end month, end time. I don't have to put month, day, time. We can just be really broad and just say this is in 1930. And I can put a display date. So I can do 1930 here. I could also say the 1930s. I could say the New Deal era, although that's incorrect because it's only 1930. But I could say the Progressive era. I could put a lot of different things in this display date because this is really up to you. This is the most important column in here because this is what positions you on the timeline itself, because this technology is going to read that and order it on the timeline itself. So you can actually input things out of order here. But so the next thing that we do, and timeline tells you this, is that it tells you to publish it to the web and get the URL from the top of the spreadsheet. And that's how we're going to be able to use it. So what we're going to do is go File, and then we're going to go Publish to the web, which should be right here. I don't know why that's not on my list. Let me make another copy. I have no idea why that's not showing me how to publish it to the web. Does anybody have any idea why that would not be popping up? Settings. Ooh. All right, I will not keep you if this is not working the way that it should be. But theoretically, like it says here, you should be able to go into your file and just select publish in the web. Maybe this is the problem. It's blowing my mind. That's why I just changed that. Thank you, Kate. I just changed those sharing settings, and it still is not allowing me to do it. This is what I mean by you sometimes have to troubleshoot a little bit. I just did this prior to this. Okay, well.
Your settings may still be restricted.
Well, it wants me to not be fully shareable. I wonder if I go over to my other. Haha.
There it is.
There it is.
It's just not highlighted.
All right. Yeah. It's just because I have it on a new Google thing I just made today. Anyway, so theoretically, we'd be able to publish it to the web. I'm not going to keep us here when I'm having technical problems. Theoretically, I'd be able to publish that to the web, get that link, and just put it right here, and it would generate a URL for me. So that would work pretty quickly. Typically, it works pretty quickly, but as the way that online presentations often go, the technology doesn't operate. All right, so yeah, go ahead.
If you want to change the order, do you just drag it, or do you have to cut and paste?
So as far as I understand it, you can cut and paste and move the order how you would like, but the system itself will order them out of, or it will put out of order Excel spreadsheet into order. So as long as you have that date on that side, that puts it. Oh, I'm getting sweaty. Sorry, I don't have AC in my house, but as if you put it on the side, it'll, if you put 1917 and 1950 and 1903 and 2000, when it puts it up on the program will order it all together. Yeah.
So like if you had two 1917s, you could distinguish them with the date and the month or something. Like
right.
That.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So if you wanted to say like two things happened in 2017, even if you don't know when they happened, you could do a January and like an August in the system, and that would help put it in order for you on the timeline itself, right? So thank you guys so much. I hope this was helpful. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Sally.
We're just going to do our ending. Did you have anything else you wanted to say before?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. Sorry that the tech wasn't working at the very end. I hope that this at least gives you guys all a jumping off point and inspires you to do something inventive in your classrooms in the future. So thank you so much for all of your attention.
Thank you, Chelsea. That was really terrific. And thank you, everyone. We now have an hour break for lunch, the best part of the day. The next presentation will be College and Career Pathways at the New York Public Library, and you can access the meeting from the Pillars program to join us there at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. I look forward to seeing you all, and I think we are all going to be tinkering with this night lab timeline JS program. I know I will be. So thank you, Chelsea.
Thank you.